Long way to go. I'm sure our panel will talk about the possibilities there. So please put your hands together as we talk cross-pollination in the fintech industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, and many opportunities in cross-pollination just in that National Account Statement just been released. So thank you for sharing the breaking news, as always, Simon, even at Intersekt today. It's my great pleasure to be sharing the stage today with Shadi, Anne-Marie and Peter in lieu of Mike from SLIP today, as he has had an operation and Peter is standing in today, so thank you very much. It is a topic that's dear to my heart. Partnerships certainly, I know we all know, in a personal sense or in a professional sense, can have many ups and many downs, and really importantly in this ecosystem, accelerate growth. And we're going to hear some amazing stories and war stories about that today as well from our panellists. We'll just do a few short introductions in case you've not read the brief online, but can I first introduce Shadi to introduce himself. Before we do that, I'll quickly introduce myself. Malia Fauna, I'm a partner at EY, an EY startup and entrepreneurship leader, and have the great privilege of working with FinTech Australia since its very early beginnings when we were still having to define what is a FinTech. Can you imagine? I'm sure you can all remember those days. Long gone are those days, but it's so fantastic to see so many people here. But over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Malia. Shadi Haddad, co-founder and CEO, incredibly humbled to be sponsoring FinTech Australia and to be here at the Intersekt Festival. So really looking forward to getting out there and amongst everybody.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Crook. I'm from Australian Payments Plus, and I lead up what we call our propositions and ecosystem development. Complicated title, happy to explain at another point.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
And I'm Peter Tully. I lead business development at SLIP. For those who don't know, SLIP's building out a network, two-sided network, so lots of collaboration to be covering today.
Absolutely. And if we think about collaboration more broadly, 6 years ago, when we talked about collaboration in fintechs, it was a bit about the unbundling of banks and the services that banks provide. And now what we're seeing is more the partnering, not just between the incumbents, but really interestingly, partnerships between fintechs and perhaps some other industries as well. Shadi, can I put the first question to you, please? When we think about that change, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, or I know Till's been around for over a decade now, can you talk about what you think has motivated that evolution of change, where you were once competitors and now we're working together?
Yeah, I think, great question. I think what's changed over the last 5 years, a lot of people didn't know who Till was. We've been around for a decade. We're the overnight fintech success story. And our growth is being fueled by partnerships. I think it's really core to our business model. It's 90% of our business. I think what's changed in the last 5 years is that fintechs have realised that they can't be perfect at everything and they can't solve every problem. But if you can put really good pointed solutions together and provide a really unique, simplified customer experience, that the sum of those parts is incredibly valuable and that the merchant and the consumer get the benefits of that solution. So I think, the acknowledgement that you can't do everything perfectly yourself and that there are partners out there that are really good at doing their part of the puzzle.
And just picking up on that point a bit further, so there's, the statement was, there's some partnerships that work really well. I'm going to move this question to you, Peter. When we think about the types of partnerships that are out there that we see fintechs and banks working together on, do you have a view on what partnerships work best?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really about aligning the priorities among the partners that you are going to be partnering with, ensuring that upfront you're very clear about what your objectives are, and building the network internally at some of these partners to be able to make it a very successful collaboration. That can happen both internally, so you can be setting that as expectations internally amongst your teams, and then how you approach and you build out that go-to-market plan with the individual partners is just going to be critical to not just getting to the starting line, but the carrying on through of that.
It's an interesting point. There's so many different ways we can partner. And when we were speaking to Anne-Marie as part of the briefing session for this, I'm sure many of you know Australian Payments Plus. But what surprised me was the depth and the breadth of Australian Payments Plus when we think about partnerships. Anne-Marie, can you speak a bit about APP Plus and more specifically how the different businesses in Australian Payments Plus actually partner with each other and think about that from a group perspective?
Sure. So Australian Payments Plus came about towards the end of last year and basically is the combination of the biggest domestic payments infrastructure. So brands that you'll all be familiar with like FPOS, MPP, BPay, as well as the Plus in AP Plus, which is the digital side of our business. So things like digital identity, mobile wallet. So many of you would have heard of Beam It, which has now been rebranded to Beam. But we're exploring things like expanding wallet as a service in addition to QR payments. So we came together, and I think the real intention behind AP Plus was to create an open payments ecosystem. And I guess, not to be dramatic in any way, but I think the thing that keeps us up at night is the fact that big tech is increasingly coming into the payments value chain. And with big tech comes closed payments ecosystem. So we see our role as really driving growth in Australia and partnering across the ecosystem to make sure that we generate economic growth, that we keep jobs in Australia, and also that we're offering the best customer experience based on our partnerships with fintechs. From an internal perspective, I think we're still moving on the journey. As you can imagine, with any transformation, when you're bringing together very different businesses with very different cultures, but I think we're unified around our kind of purpose, and our purpose is to unite people and technologies to power better experiences. And I think we see that by bringing together teams to focus on customer needs and having that customer at the center, we're able to bring those different parts of the business together. And I think we've got a really exciting road ahead of us, not without its challenges, but I think we can do some good.
It's an incredible example of partnership on a quite global scale. I'm super excited to see what happens with Australian Payments Plus, given the kind of companies that collaboration is happening with. We all know them, BPay, FPOS. As we also know, having collaboration partnerships, there can be a lot of trouble with negotiating those deals, the nuances in the clauses, and how that actually works from a market's perspective. Shadi, have you got any examples of where that's not worked well? So examples where there's actually been some challenges, because we're talking about a lot of positivity with partnerships and accelerating growth, and that's fantastic. But what about where we could have, you've had some lessons learned?
Yeah, another great question. I think when, sort of back to my point earlier, the strength of a partnership is knowing where the boundaries are and of the capability. And I think what sometimes you see is partnerships where each party tries to go into sort of the other party's experience or the other party's, lines. And what happens is the responsibility gets blurred and the solution gets blurred, and the customer is the one that suffers, incredibly in that scenario. So, and it's really important because, again, the strength in that partnership is those lines of demarcation.
Anything else to add from Anne-Marie or Peter on particular, the challenges and what your lessons learned?
Yeah, what's really unique about Slip is that in this two-sided network that we're building, it's not just partnerships with financial institutions. We're also building out partnerships with the major retailers in Australia. So as a tiny fintech, getting squeezed between the largest Australian corporations, both banks and non-banks, is trying to build that collaboration and actually being that conduit for a conversation to be happening between, again, your example of we're live with NAB and Chemist Warehouse, to actually bring those parties together and having them start to work together and have them understand each other's businesses. One example is that, again, to Shadi's point around the technology and really defining that up front, we've had a partner who wanted to build the smart receipt experience. So that's a receipt. It's your proper proof of purchase within their banking app. And they wanted to build it custom for their own banking experience. But then you turn around to Chemist Warehouse and you say, you have tens of thousands of frontline staff, and you're going to need to educate them on a receipt experience that is different with this bank relative to other banks. And so that, again, going back to the core of the talk, it's around collaboration and trying to get these parties together to actually understand some of the challenges and the core parts of each other's businesses has been a hurdle that we had to get over.
And an opportunity as well. So what I love with that story and what I can see with all three of these companies that they've done is it's about collaboration, not just within fintechs or with incumbents. It's actually thinking much more broadly now into the retail space, and that's where the opportunity lies, doesn't it, to create a more fulsome customer success or customer experience across that whole journey together. And yes, there's going to be challenges, but the more that we can collaborate together, there's actually opportunities within it. And I think that retail example is a fantastic one. And I mean, Slip should be really proud of the fact that they've actually partnered with all four of the big banks in Australia, which is a fantastic feat in itself. So congratulations on that in itself. I guess on that theme of opportunity comes innovation, and collaboration and innovation can go hand in hand, and I'd like to just put a question to the panel around how you see the intersection between innovation and collaboration and some examples around that. Who wants to take the question first?
I guess I can kick it
Thanks,
off.
Anne-Marie.
So I think for us, we're in a very privileged position of having access across that network. So Peter spoke to retailers, financial institutions. We have access, I think, to that entire Australian ecosystem. And I see part of our role in bringing together those fintechs with our member partners and with the broader ecosystem as well. I think what we've come to realize is that through collaboration, we get the best of both worlds, in the sense of, from a selfish perspective, you can fill capability gaps that you don't have, you have a quicker go-to-market. But from the reverse kind of flip side, we're able to provide fintechs with a platform and access to people that they may not have had access otherwise. So I think it's a two-sided coin, and it's beneficial for both parties. And I think, we talk about the success of fintechs within Australia means more economic growth and more overall growth as well.
Excellent, thank you. And Shadi, I'm going to redirect that question in a bit of a different way to yourself, because Shadi's the COO and co-founder of Till, but he's got a technical background. So I'd be really interested to hear your views on that intersection between innovation and also collaboration.
I think the payments industry in itself has gone through tremendous change. We saw the entrance of Square, Toast, Shopify, these huge, fast-growing fintechs that were focused on providing one solution that covered running the business of the end merchant, solving the consumer experience, and then putting it all together and taking a payment. On the other side, you had a bunch of buy now, pay later firms, emerging fintechs, new ways to pay, the emergence of QR payments, self-service. The pandemic fueled a change in the way we took payments. And right in the middle were companies like us going, we can either be a barrier to the enablement of that innovation, or we can be a bit more flexible and a bit more agile. And what we've found is that a level of agility towards being able to bring companies together to solve for that end requirement, which is ubiquitous payments, regardless of where it comes from, is a really fine balance. And so we built a business model that essentially said, if someone wants to become like a Square, they can use the payment rails that we provide to provide that proposition. If somebody wants to accept, any form of payment, they can come to us and we provide the rails to do that as well. And I think the really important point is that if you stay true to what you're trying to deliver, and you don't build bespoke, so you focus on providing uniformity across the innovation stack, you can start to see that the use of your technology can be applied and shifted and shaped in any way it needs to be.
Fascinating, the intersection of innovation and collaboration, and the importance of innovation and how it's it can have a different definition to different people, and sometimes it's it's blue sky innovation, sometimes it's incremental innovation is what I heard you just talking about, which is equally just and important and creates so much different opportunities across the ecosystem. Peter, I know you've worked in a few different places around the world, and we've seen, as we're talking about, an evolution of cross-pollination of fintechs and partnerships and collaboration, particularly over the last 5 years in Australia, but we've still got a way to go as well. How do you compare the Australian maturity of partnership and collaboration to what you may have seen in other global markets?
It's a great question. I think we've seen it accelerate pretty dramatically in the last couple of years. Again, to the earlier question of just realizing that collaboration actually creates a 1 + 1 = 3 outcome for all the participants in that collaborative pool. And that's what we've tried to do, is partnering with all of the big four banks in order to change payments. There's one part of the payments experience today that is still analog. A piece of paper, you stand there at the till, and a piece of paper prints out. And yes, there are tools to re-digitize that, but the fact that that hasn't been digitized when you can pay with your watch is just mind-numbing. And so that's where we've set out, is not just to do that here, but also to do that globally. And you then add on top of that the environmental impact that actually comes from paper receipts. Many don't know that actually they're covered in toxins that can be cancer-causing. So be careful when you touch paper receipts. And so it's kind of a win for us in building out this network that does create a win on merchant sides, win on bank sides, I don't believe in any other market it would be as possible as it is here, due to both the banks and merchants leaning into this as an opportunity, as well as the consolidation, which is really unique in Australia.
Yeah, excellent. And Shadi, what's your viewpoint on that? Australia compared to the rest of the world, Till's operating in multiple jurisdictions around the world, so you're living and breathing this at the moment?
Yeah, we absolutely are. I think partnerships in Australia are still very much in their infancy. If you sort of look across the ditch to the US, the partnership ecosystem in payments is pretty well defined. You've got a bank that's typically the sponsor acquirer, you've got a processor, you've got a POS gateway, you've got an e-commerce gateway, you've got the solution provider, and then you've got the customer. And so everyone tends to know that that is kind of the ecosystem. There are some disruptors that go, I want to do all of it, or 90% of it. And so you see they're kind of the outliers, and they're your Squares, your Shopifys, your Toasts, those sorts of guys. Coming back to Australia, we're only just starting to see the green shoots of software companies going and understanding that the combination of solutions, whether it's software, payments, services together, is actually okay and is actually a bit more beneficial than trying to protect the customer footprint and only get a smaller piece of that pie. And what we're really seeing here is that every ISV, every software company is starting to go, I've got quite a large customer base, I've got a fixed SaaS revenue. Chasing more SaaS revenue is a lot harder than going back to my existing customer base and unlocking payments revenue or services revenue, value-added services revenue. And so the green shoots I'm talking about is that every software company now is looking to partner, and 2 years ago when you were knocking on the door of a POS company going, hey, we want to sell payments to your customers, they were like, that's my customer. We do all the work, we install them, we look after them, we take the calls when they're frustrated with the banks. Why should we open the door to our customers? So that mindset in the last 2 years has shifted significantly, and if we look at our growth over the last 18 months, it's fueled purely by that change in behaviour.
And of course, I know we've all heard, the pandemic's almost accelerated that because everything has moved, absolutely doubled down on digitalisation, and the customer has also accelerated the acceptance of digitalisation. And you're right, Peter. Why do we still have all these paper mechanisms, including receipts and other aspects? And to Simon's point, his question about MyKey in Melbourne, I'm sure we all have some frustrations with MyKey in Melbourne, and compared to Oakpool in Sydney, but let's not get into that. Where I want to move to now is Shadi, you've just alluded to some frustrations with working in partnership and collaboration with the incumbents and the big banks. And I'm going to move this question to Peter. Can you talk about the practicality of managing some of those partnerships with the incumbents or the big banks or even bigger organisations where you've got different speeds, different systems you need to work within? Can you share some examples and tips around that?
Yeah, it's not easy. I think as everyone on the stage would attest, it has its challenges at times. I think it goes back to my earlier point is setting clear goals up front is critical. Setting those targets so you know how you're performing as both parties coming together. Secondly, it's about networking internally at that bank because, as we know, lots of folks move within banks and working up to a senior level so that as you hit those speed bumps, you have the ability to escalate and potentially navigate around where that speed bump might be. But the second piece of that, it was just as important as internally within the teams, making sure that the internal teams who's joined a startup, expecting to move up startup pace, but if you're dependent on traditional banks' pace to success of your company, it's just ensuring that your internal teams realize, and you actually can create little mini wins. So yes, the finish line or the starting line really of your partnership may be down the road, but the ability to actually have some small wins along the way that may not seem major or may not be a reason to celebrate at a big company. But again, when you're really churning away the midnight oil, it's those mini wins that keep the team going.
I might jump in there. I think really important points made there as well. I think what we're seeing as well is every partnership wants to have some level of customization, some level of uniqueness. I think the importance of defining a clear framework that is standard, that allows you to get some wins along the way, and then some hurdles to hit together before you then jump into a fully blown, customised, bespoke partnership, are really important parts of partnering because everybody wants to do everything custom, and there's no way to scale a business when you do it that way. But if you put some hurdles in place and you get some wins along the way, it's much easier to invest the time and the resource to be able to customise and make a solution unique for that particular base.
And the other thing I just heard in both of those examples was by getting some wins on the board, you're actually developing some trust in that relationship on the capability and probably a personal level as well, which will help accelerate and smooth out some of those inevitable bumps in that partnership. And Anne-Marie, from a different perspective, in industry collaborations, any examples you've got about managing those practical realities and how Australian Payment Plus, who's been doing that more recently, has been able to adjust at the different speeds and operating models?
So I think I spoke earlier about the kind of cross-functional working teams, and I think, we sit down with our customers or members up front, establish what their needs are, map out how our solutions can meet those expectations. And I think, to Shadi's point, it's then setting clear stage gates for how you can move through this development. So as a specific example, at the moment we're building out our QR payments capabilities, and it's a journey, right? And there are different capabilities that we will need to build along the way. So part of it is managing expectations up front of what we can do today, and also sort of showing that future state and what is possible, a year or 2 years out. So I think it's that combination between having those stage gates and those regular milestones, and also having that balance of, managing expectations and being realistic about where you are today and where you can be in future.
Excellent tips. I guess building on that theme, Shadi, can you talk about how Till runs that partner-led model and how you actually support your partners in building out their own value proposition?
So we set out to actually, for people that don't know, we started as a payment gateway. We're omni-channel. we used to sit in front of the banks and acquirers and provide a solution to software companies, equipment manufacturers and their customers. Fast forward 5 years under that model, and the common denominator was the software company and Till Payments providing an omni-channel service, and behind us was a set of acquirers that we were swapping and changing at the request of the merchant. And that was because the enablement component of being able to provide outcomes for their businesses was really driven by the technology stack and the software company that we were working with at the time. Having become an end-to-end provider, having become a merchant acquirer, what we've seen is that if you can do the really hard stuff but make it really simple, then the uptake is incredibly fast. And what we've seen is that, to some of the points, you can't do everything yourself before you're ready to do them. One of the things we had to do was partner with an FBOSS member, build our volume and become an FBOSS member, right? And those hurdles and those gates taught us that we need to do the same with our partners. If we can't just walk up and start with a walk-up start, to get a membership or become an acquirer, pledge collateral, have strict AML compliance, underwriting regimes, then the partner should have those same hurdles. And if you create those frameworks early and you understand, that some partners will be able to do it and others won't, and for the ones that don't know how to do it, you can provide a solution for that, then, it's a really simple way. So the proposition, for us is we provide our platform under a white label, payments as a service. Everything from origination through to settlement, right? And I think that's really important to note because there are lots of people that sit behind us, a lot of partners that sit behind us to enable that, and that's really, really core to what we do.
The art of keeping it simple is often not simple, as we all know, but incredibly important and powerful, isn't it? We're going to, on this topic of cross-pollination across fintechs, that's almost the heart of what we're doing here at Intersekt as well. It's a theme across this entire event today, and being able to cross-pollinate and share ideas and meet each other together. And I want to finish this panel with a question for each of you to finish on what's your one takeaway, one piece of advice that you'd like to leave everyone on how best summarise it all, because we've had a lot of tips, but your one piece of advice you want everyone to leave the room with on how best to collaborate with either incumbents and or other fintechs. Who wants to kick off? Go on, Anne-Marie.
Okay, I'll do that. I need a second to think about it. I think in terms of collaborating with fintechs in the most efficient way, I think for us it's having those conversations and keeping across what's happening in the market. So it's a very fast-paced, dynamic environment, always changing. So I think for us we have a responsibility to make sure that we're continuing those conversations and connecting with fintechs across the ecosystem.
So you'll be able to do that lot today and tomorrow.
I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And Peter?
So I think when we think about collaboration, it's about bringing two parties together to partner to achieve an outcome. And for us, you're going to work again through the night to get you to that partner launch. You're going to go live, but that's not the finish line. Is seeing that as the starting line. And the ability to grow that relationship going forward is just so much more critical than actually getting you there, because you could go there and it's just crickets. And so the ability to actually nurture that and build upon that, it's kind of like any good relationship, making sure to focus on it to make sure it can actually achieve and continue to hit goals.
Excellent. And Shadi, your one key piece of advice?
The partnership is a journey, and you need to understand your limits within that partnership, and you need to evolve across the partnership for it to be successful.
And I think we could apply that both professionally in our professional lives and also our personal lives as well, across partnerships and relationships in all its forms. Excellent advice. Please put your hands together and thank Shadi, Anne-Marie and Peter for their insights. And I'm sure they'd be happy to connect with any of you throughout the Intersekt or elsewhere. Thank you so much for joining us today.